So the UN accusing North Korea of violating sanctions. Yep, again, the country reportedly earning nearly $200 million from banned exports last year. So what good are the sanctions, really? Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. joins me now. Thank you so much for talking to us. You know, I feel like a broken record because every time we talk about North Korea, we talk about sanctions. We talk about weapons that were fired after they have been told not to, that they were supposed to abide by shutting down their regime. What is the point of sanctions? If sanctions clearly do not work when it comes to North Korea, then?
Well, you know, actually, there's a bit of a good news silver lining to this situation here, because number one, they were caught.
Please share it with us.
They were caught is the first point. But when you look at, like in 2015, before any of these sanctions were applied, North Korea did $3.5 billion worth of exports. So 200 million is considerably less, which means these sanctions are actually having a very biting effect. So what we need to do is we need to plug every hole that we find and be more vigilant to make sure that there's no new ones. But we recognize that we're keeping that maximum pressure on, like the president says, and they're actually having some success.
Yeah, that's why we call them a rogue regime. I mean, they go rogue, and they do not abide by sanctions. So then what should the U.S. do? Obviously, you mentioned keep pressure, of course, you know, with regard to both sanctions. But what about our military?
Well, what we have to do with the military is what we have done from the beginning, and that is absolutely unequivocal that we have the containment and deterrence value, that we never cease from communicating that if they ever use any of these weapons or threaten the United States or its allies, then they can count on a devastating and overwhelming response. But what we also need to communicate is that there is a way out, because we don't want to completely block it off to where they think that's the only thing that they can do. So we need to at least leave the possibility for them to comply at some point, even if it takes a long time. Because what's critical is that we do not do anything that's going to start a war. And I'll just tell you, the only way a war starts here is if we launch what's called a preventive military strike, because that will probably start the very thing that we're trying to stop. And we just cannot do that. It would be catastrophic. So
with regard to the import and export needs of North Korea, there had been reports Pyongyang was possibly running out of money. You know, we heard stories like that. You never really quite know what's true. But is that likely to ever happen, do you think? And could that change the tide?
Yeah, yes, it is, absolutely. And that's why the banking system, every way that we can to continue to squeeze a little tighter and to make life more difficult, makes it more problematic for them to get the things that they need for their military, to get the things they need for their weapons program in particular. And yeah, that's a good way to continue to strangle that regime.
The 213-page report apparently indicates that North Korea may actually be helping Syrians President Bashar Assad maintain its banned weapons stockpile, those chemical weapons that he uses to kill his own people. And this comes just weeks after President Trump called out Russia, also an ally of Syria, for helping North Korea recover from its economic pressure put on by China. So it all comes down to Russia and China. And again, China and the U.S. working together to put further pressure on North Korea. But what about putting pressure on North Korea and China and Russia? Because if Russia is aiding, what do we do about Russia to make it stop?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Everybody always talks about China, and we're doing a lot with them. The president even mentioned that, you know, we're getting some cooperation with China. But Russia's kind of not talked about very much. But actually, if there's ever conflict between the United States and North Korea, the biggest winner is Russia.
Sure.
So we want to make sure that we don't fall into any trap that they want to try to instigate things, because that would play to their advantage, because they're trying to work against our interests all over the place. So let's, you know, again, shut down any kind of holes we find in any of these sanctions. And any time that Russia's not doing something that they've agreed to, we need to not hesitate to call that out publicly.
And the president has called out Russia, and that is a good thing. But it doesn't seem to be enough. I mean, what do we do, aside from calling out Russia, in order to get Russia to cooperate? Is Russia ever going to cooperate? Because it seems Russia does what Russia wants, and Vladimir Putin doesn't take orders from anyone else.
Well, true enough. I mean, Russia is following their own national self-interest, and we have to follow our national self-interest. As President Trump has said on numerous occasions, it's America first. And so we need to do whatever we can with our assets, both that's the overt and covert, to make sure that our interests are taken care of. And I think that there's a number of things that we can do. We don't want to antagonize Russia, because to the extent that we can, let's cooperate where it's possible, where it benefits our interest. But we have to make it clear that when they operate against our interest, that's not cost-free.
No, it's not. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for talking to us.
My pleasure. Thank you.